The woman who crawled through hell to keep a promise. Nathan Cole stood at the Wyoming depot clutching a faded letter, watching the empty horizon where his mail-order bride should have appeared 3 days ago. His 6-year-old daughter Lila tugged his sleeve. "Papa, is she coming?" The station master approached with a telegram, his face grave. "Wagon wreck. 20 miles south in the Badlands. No survivors expected." But Nathan saw something the others missed. The date. Eleanor Hayes had crashed 4 days ago, not 3. If she'd promised to come, if her letters meant anything, she was out there right now, dying, crawling, refusing to break her word. He had to find her before the desert finished what the crash had started. Welcome to a story of impossible survival and deliberate love. Stay until the end to see how a promise made in letters becomes a family forged in fire. Like this video and comment your city so I can see how far this story reaches across the world. The Wyoming sun hung merciless in a cloudless sky, turning the depot platform into a griddle of warped planks and shimmering heat. Nathan Cole had been standing there since dawn, his weathered hat doing little to shield eyes that had grown too familiar with scanning empty horizons. The letter in his coat pocket had worn soft from repeated folding, the careful script now committed to memory. "I will arrive on the afternoon stage July 14th. I give you my word, Mr. Cole. Whatever stands between us and that meeting, I will overcome it. Eleanor." July 14th had come and gone. Then the 15th. Now the 16th crawled toward noon, and the platform remained stubbornly empty of everything except dust devils and disappointment. "Papa." Lila's small hand found his calloused palm. "My feet hurt." Nathan looked down at his daughter, her dark braids already escaping their ribbons, her face streaked with the particular grime only a 6-year-old could accumulate in perfect stillness. 3 days they'd made this pilgrimage to town, 3 days of watching her hope deflate like a punctured water skin. "I know, little bird. Just a bit longer." "That's what you said yesterday." She wasn't accusing, merely stating facts the way children did, their honesty sharp as new barbed wire. He had no answer for that. Instead, he watched the heat shimmer off the rails that stretched east toward civilization, toward the world where Eleanor Hayes had written those careful letters over 6 months of correspondence. Letters that spoke of loneliness transmuted into purpose, of choosing the unknown over the familiar cage of expectations. "I am not beautiful in the way men typically prefer," she'd written once, her honesty like cold water. "But I am capable. I can read and cipher. I grow things. I endure. If you seek ornament, Mr. Cole, look elsewhere. If you seek partnership, I will walk through fire to reach you." He'd believed her. God help him, he'd believed every word. The station master, a rail-thin man named Hewitt, with spectacles that perpetually slid down his nose, emerged from the telegraph office with the careful step of someone bearing bad news. Nathan's chest tightened. "Mr. Cole." Hewitt's Adam's apple bobbed. "Got a wire from the junction." Nathan's hand instinctively tightened on Lila's shoulder. She looked up at him, reading the shift in his posture, the way she'd learned to read weather before storms. "What's it say?" Hewitt glanced at Lila, then back at Nathan. "Maybe the little one should—" "She stays. What's it say?" The station master unfolded the yellow paper with trembling fingers. "Westbound wagon, wrecked in the Badlands, 20 miles south of here, near Devil's Throat Canyon. Stage rolled, driver dead, 3 passengers." He paused, his voice dropping. "No survivors expected, if any lasted this long. Stage was supposed to arrive here on the 14th. The world narrowed to the edges of that telegram. Nathan's mind worked with the methodical precision that kept ranches running through drought and disaster. The 14th. Eleanor's arrival date, 20 miles south, 4 days ago. "List of passenger?" His voice came out steady despite the roaring in his ears. Didn't give names, just said commercial stage, regular route. Lila tugged his sleeve. "Papa, what's a wreck?" He knelt, bringing himself eye level with the only person left in the world he'd allowed himself to love without reservation. "It means something broke, little bird. Something broke, and people might need help." "Is it the lady, Miss Eleanor?" The question hung in the superheated air. Around them, the small depot town of Clearwater went about its business, A freight wagon rolling past, someone hammering in the smithy, the general store's door jingling as Mrs. Henderson emerged with her packages. Normal life, continuing its relentless forward march while his own threatened to splinter apart. I don't know. He smoothed a strand of hair behind her ear. But I'm going to find out. Hewitt cleared his throat. Mr. Cole, that wire says no survivors expected. It's been 4 days in this heat. Even if someone lived through the crash, then I'll bury them proper. Nathan straightened, his decision already made. Lila, you're staying with the Hendersons. No. Her small face set in lines he recognized from her mother. That same stubborn certainty that had made Sarah Cole a force of nature in her brief time on Earth. I'm coming. This isn't... You said whatever stands between, you overcome it. You told me that's what Miss Eleanor wrote. Lila's eyes, dark as creek stones, didn't waver. I want to help overcome. Nathan looked at his daughter, 6 years old and already acquainted with loss in ways no child should be. Sarah had died bringing their second child into a world that refused to let it stay. Complications, the doctor had said, as if that single word could contain the hemorrhaging, the pallor, the way her hand had gone slack in his. For 2 years, he and Lila had managed alone. Their grief a third presence at every meal, every bedtime, every moment that should have held a mother's touch. The letters to Eleanor had been an act of pragmatism that became something else, her responses revealing a mind sharp and searching, a soul that understood loss without drowning in it. She'd written about her own loneliness, her own cage, a Baltimore townhouse where she'd nursed aging parents through their final years, where society expected her to settle into comfortable spinsterhood, teaching piano to children whose parents pitied her unmarried state. I am 32 years old, she'd written, and I have never chosen a single day of my life. Until now. I choose this, Mr. Cole. I choose unknown sunrise over familiar twilight. I choose your daughter's need for a mother over safety. I choose you, sight unseen, because you write of partnership as if it were a sacred thing. And now she might be dead in the desert, her choice reduced to bones and broken promises. All right. He made his decision. You ride with me. But you do exactly as I say, when I say it. Understood? Lila nodded, solemn as a judge. Hewitt shifted uncomfortably. You'll need supplies, water, medical kit, though it won't matter if they're dead. Nathan finished the thought. I know. Get them anyway. An hour later, they rode south with 2 horses, enough water for 3 days, bandages, laudanum, whiskey for cleaning wounds, and a shovel strapped to the pack saddle. The landscape shifted from the relative greenery near Clearwater's Creek to the harder country where Wyoming showed its bones, red rock, scrub sage, distances that swallowed sound and hope in equal measure. Lila rode in front of Nathan, her small body fitting against his chest as naturally as breathing. She'd been quiet since they left town, processing in that grave way of hers. Papa? Yes, little bird? If Miss Eleanor is hurt, can we fix her? The question assumed so much that Eleanor was the passenger, that she'd survived, that fixing was possible. The optimism of it squeezed his heart. I don't know, but if she's out there, we won't leave her alone. Mama was alone. Lila's voice went small. When she died. You were getting the doctor and I was too little to help, and she was alone. Nathan's throat constricted. They'd never talked about it directly, the mechanics of that awful night. He'd assumed Lila had been too young to understand, too sheltered by grief to remember details. You were with her, he said carefully. In the house. That's not alone. But I didn't know how to help. I didn't know what was wrong. I just sat there. Her fingers twisted in the horse's mane. If Miss Eleanor is hurt, I want to know how to help this time. The sun beat down as they rode, the only sound the rhythmic creak of saddle leather and the horse's hooves on hardpan. Nathan tried to find words adequate to the moment and came up empty. Instead, he tightened his arm around his daughter and kept riding. They reached Devil's Throat Canyon as afternoon shadows began their eastward stretch. The canyon was a slash in the landscape where some ancient flood had carved through layered rock, leaving walls that glowed rust red in the slanting light. The stage road skirted its rim, a stupid route born of surveying offices 1,000 miles away, where men with rulers drew lines without considering what happened when drivers got tired, when wheels hit loose shale, when horses spooked. The wreckage announced itself first by smell, the sweet sick odor of death ripening in heat. Then by sight, the stage itself, a splintered ruin 50 feet down the canyon slope, canted at an angle that spoke of violent tumbling. Scattered around it like a child's abandoned toys lay trunks, parcels, broken wheels, things rendered unrecognizable by impact, and bodies. Nathan reined in, his hand automatically covering Lila's eyes. "Don't look, little bird." But she'd already seen. He felt her stiffen, heard her sharp intake of breath. "Stay with the horses." He dismounted, lifting her down. "I mean it, Lila. Stay here." He approached the wreck with bandana tied over his nose and mouth, picking his way down the loose slope. The driver lay near the road, thrown clear but broken nonetheless. 2 passengers, men by their clothing, were still tangled in the stage's remains, their deaths written in the unnatural angles of their limbs. 3 bodies. The telegram had said 3 passengers. Nathan's pulse quickened. He circled the wreck, scanning for a 4th, for any sign of drag marks. Not animal, too deliberate, too purposeful. 2 parallel grooves in the dust, leading away from the wreck toward the canyon wall. Boot heels, he realized. Someone dragging themselves, both legs useless. He followed the marks into the shadow of an overhang, where the rock formation created a shallow cave barely deep enough to shield from direct sun. And there, curled in on herself like something trying to disappear into the stone itself, was Eleanor Hayes. She was alive. Barely. Her skirt was shredded, legs bent at angles that made his stomach drop. Dried blood crusted her temple, her arms, her hands that were raw meat from 4 days of pulling herself across rock. Her face was burned crimson from sun exposure, lips cracked and bleeding, but her chest rose and fell, shallow and rapid. Eleanor. He didn't realize he'd said her name aloud until her eyelids fluttered. Her eyes, when they opened, were fever-bright and unfocused. "Late," she whispered. "I'm late. Promised the 14th. Nathan knelt beside her, his hands hovering, unsure where to touch without causing pain. "You made it farther than anyone expected." "The little girl, Lila." Eleanor's hand twitched, trying to rise. "Is she, disappointed?" The question broke something in his chest. This woman, dying by inches in a desert canyon, worried about disappointing a child she'd never met. "She's here. She rode with me to find you." Eleanor's eyes cleared for just a moment, finding his face. "You came." "You gave your word you'd arrive. Seemed only fair I give mine to meet you." A sound escaped her throat. Might have been a laugh if she'd had moisture left for it. Then her eyes rolled back, consciousness slipping away like water through fingers. Nathan shed his coat, laid it over her, and climbed back up the slope with speed born of desperation. Lila stood exactly where he'd left her, holding both horses' reins with white-knuckled determination. "Is she there?" "Yes." "Is she dead?" "Not yet." He grabbed the canteen, the medical supplies, the blanket from his bedroll. "But close. I need you to be very brave now, Lila. Can you do that?" She nodded, her face pale but set. They worked as the sun sank toward the western rim of the world. Nathan cleaned Eleanor's wounds as best he could, poured water between her cracked lips, drop by precious drop, splinted her broken legs with branches from his emergency kindling. Lila held supplies, passed bandages, spoke in a quiet stream of consciousness that seemed aimed more at Eleanor's unconscious form than at her father. "We have a good ranch, Miss Eleanor. There's a creek with frogs. Papa says I can have a kitten when we find one. I know how to gather eggs without scaring the hens. Mrs. Henderson taught me to sew a straight seam, mostly straight anyway. You don't have to be perfect right away. Papa says practice makes progress, not perfect." As Lila talked, Nathan assessed the impossible task before him. Eleanor needed a doctor, needed care beyond his rough field medicine. The nearest physician was back in Clearwater, 20 miles over terrain that would kill her if moved wrong. But staying here in the canyon meant watching her die by inches from infection, dehydration, the 1,000 small failures a broken body could inflict. Eleanor's eyes opened again as he was rigging a travois from branches and blanket. This time they tracked his movement with marginally more clarity. Can't move me. Each word cost her. Legs are shattered. You'll kill me. Trying. You'll die for certain if I leave you here. Then that's how it ends. She drew a shuddering breath. I chose this. Knew the risks. The hell you're dying in a canyon because some drunk stage driver missed a turn. Nathan secured the last knot on the travois with more force than necessary. You crawled for 4 days to keep your promise. I'm not letting you quit when help is 20 miles away. Not your decision. He met her eyes, those fever-bright eyes that held a will stronger than her broken body. You wrote that you chose me. That means I get a say in whether you live or die. And I say you live. Arrogant. Bastard. That's the spirit. He allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Get mad. Stay mad. Anger's better fuel than hope right now. As twilight turned the canyon walls to purple shadow, Nathan lifted Eleanor onto the travois with movements as gentle as he could manage. She screamed once, a raw, animal sound that sent Lila stumbling backward, then passed out again, her body's mercy in the face of overwhelming pain. They started the journey back in full dark, Nathan leading his horse with the travois behind it, Lila mounted on the pack horse, the night pressing close with its freight of stars and fear. He set a pace measured in heartbeats rather than miles, slow enough to minimize jolting, fast enough to outdistance despair. Hours blended together, marked only by periodic stops to check Eleanor's breathing, to dribble more water between her lips, to adjust the travois ropes. Lila dozed in the saddle, trusting her horse to follow. Nathan walked in a trance of exhaustion and determination, his mind circling the same thoughts. 20 miles. She has to last 20 miles. Just keep moving. Just keep breathing. Both of you. Keep breathing. Dawn found them still 10 miles from Clearwater, the landscape emerging from darkness in shades of gray before color returned to the world. Eleanor hadn't woken since they'd started moving. Her breathing had gone shallow and irregular, her skin burning with fever under Nathan's palm. Papa? Lila's voice was scratchy with thirst and fear. Is she going to make it? He didn't have an honest answer, so he gave her the only truth he could. She's fought this long. We fight longer. They pushed through the morning heat, Nathan's body moving on will alone, past fatigue into a state where each step felt separate from the last, unconnected to anything but the necessity of forward motion. The horses plodded with their heads low, trusting him to guide them home. Clearwater appeared first as a smudge on the horizon, then as distinct buildings, then finally as the real and solid town they'd left a lifetime ago. People emerged from doorways as the strange procession passed, a dust-caked rancher leading a travois bearing a broken woman, a small girl slumped in her saddle like a refugee from war. Hewitt ran from the depot. Dear God, you found her. Get Dr. Morrison. Nathan's voice came out as a croak. Now. The next hours existed in fragments. The doctor's house. Eleanor being lifted from the travois onto a proper bed, her scream as broken legs shifted. Morrison's grim face as he examined her. Lila falling asleep sitting upright in a chair, her hand reaching for Nathan's even in unconsciousness. Morrison emerged from the examination room as afternoon sun slanted through the windows, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hands still damp from washing. Nathan stood despite every muscle screaming for rest. Both legs broken in multiple places, 3 ribs, possible skull fracture, severe dehydration and sun exposure, infection in half a dozen wounds. The doctor recited the litany with professional detachment, then his voice softened. Mr. Cole, I've seen men die from half of what she's endured. The fact that she's alive at all is... Will she live? Morrison hesitated, and in that hesitation, Nathan saw his own fear reflected. I don't know. The next few days will tell. If the fever breaks, if infection doesn't set in deeper, if her body has anything left to fight with. Maybe. But you should prepare yourself for... No. Nathan's hand cut the air. She crawled through hell to keep a promise. She doesn't get to die in a clean bed 2 days later. That's not how this ends. Mr. Cole, how long before we know? 3 days? Maybe 4? Morrison put his hand on Nathan's shoulder, the weight of it both burden and comfort. Go home. Clean up. Sleep. There's nothing you can do here that I can't do better. But Nathan couldn't make himself leave, couldn't make himself step away from the woman who'd chosen him sight unseen, who'd written those letters full of careful hope, who'd dragged herself across a desert with broken legs rather than break her word. He settled into the chair beside Lila, gathered his sleeping daughter into his lap, and kept vigil. Eleanor woke once as night fell, her eyes finding him in the lamplight. Still here? Not a question. A statement of fact delivered with something that might have been satisfaction if she'd had the strength for it. Told you. We don't quit on each other. Her hand moved fractionally on the coverlet, fingers extending. He took them in his own, those abraded, raw fingers that had clawed at rock for 4 days straight. Your daughter, Eleanor whispered. Beautiful. Brave girl. You raised her right. She wants to help you heal. Said she didn't know how to help when her mother died, but she wants to learn now. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears that spilled down her temples into her hair. Then I have to stay alive. Can't disappoint that kind of hope. That's right. Nathan's thumb brushed across her knuckles, gentle as breath. You made a promise to a little girl who believes in keeping them. Time to finish what you started. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once, a tiny movement that cost her visible effort. Her eyes drifted shut again, but her fingers tightened fractionally around his before releasing back into unconsciousness. Nathan sat in that quiet room, Lila's weight solid against his chest, Eleanor's breathing the only sound besides the ticking of Morrison's mantel clock. Outside, Clearwater settled into its evening rhythms, dinner smells, closing shop doors, the distant bark of someone's dog. Normal life, continuing its march. But in this room, nothing was normal. In this room, 3 people balanced on the knife edge between loss and possibility, between the life that was and the life that might yet be. The promise that never arrived had become something else entirely. It had become a choice made and remade with every breath, every mile, every moment of refusal to let go. Eleanor had chosen to crawl through hell. Nathan had chosen to search beyond hope. Lila had chosen to ride into the desert to help save a stranger. Now they would choose again, and keep choosing, until the story found its ending, whatever that ending might be. Nathan looked at Eleanor's face in the lamplight, already less flushed than hours before, her breathing marginally easier. Not victory. Not yet. But a chance. A fragile, hard-won chance born of impossible endurance and stubborn hope. Stay, he whispered to her sleeping form. Please, stay. And in the morning light that would come, in the days of fever and healing ahead, in the moments where death seemed certain and survival impossible, they would all keep choosing, keep fighting, keep believing that promises made could still be promises kept, even when the path between was nothing but fire and dust and pain. That was what it meant to overcome whatever stood between. Not to avoid the crash, not to escape the desert, but to crawl through it anyway, inch by impossible inch, toward the life you'd chosen, toward home. The fever came in waves. For 3 days, Eleanor Hayes existed in a twilight world where consciousness was a shore she sometimes reached and sometimes missed entirely. Morrison changed her bandages twice daily, his face growing grimmer each time he unwrapped the wounds on her legs. Nathan watched from the doorway, forbidden to enter during treatments but unable to leave, reading disaster in every line of the doctor's posture. Infection's spreading, Morrison said on the second day, not bothering to soften the truth. The right leg especially. I've cleaned it best I can, but what? Nathan's hands gripped the door frame. But she was lying in that canyon for 4 days with open fractures. Desert dirt, her own blood, God knows what else got into those wounds. I can fight surface infection. I can't fight what's already in the bone. Lila stood beside her father, her small hand finding his. She'd barely left the doctor's house, sleeping in chairs, eating whatever Mrs. Henderson brought, keeping her vigil with a solemnity that aged her beyond 6 years. Now she looked up at Morrison with those dark, serious eyes. What happens if you can't fight it? The doctor crouched to her level, his voice gentle. Then Miss Eleanor gets very sick, little one. Sicker than she already is. And then, Morrison glanced at Nathan, who nodded fractionally. Tell her the truth. And then her body has to decide if it's strong enough to heal anyway. Lila absorbed this with a slow nod. She's strong. She crawled for 4 days. That's very strong. Yes, it is. Morrison's eyes were suspiciously bright. Very strong indeed. But strength, Nathan was learning, wasn't always enough. That night, Eleanor's fever spiked to terrifying heights. She thrashed in the bed, crying out in delirium, fragments of sentences that painted pictures of the life she'd left behind. A narrow house in Baltimore. Parents who'd needed her until the end. A man named Chester who'd courted her once, then abandoned her when a younger, prettier option appeared. Years of teaching piano to children who pitied her spinsterhood while their mothers whispered behind fans. Had to leave, she mumbled through cracked lips. Had to choose something. Anything. Couldn't be that person anymore. Nathan sat beside her bed with cool cloths pressing them to her burning forehead, her wrists, her throat. Morrison had shown him the technique, explaining that fever this high could damage the brain if it didn't break soon. The doctor had gone home to sleep. Someone had to be fresh for the morning, leaving Nathan with instructions and dire warnings. Talk to her, Morrison had said. Sometimes they can hear us even when they can't respond. Give her something to fight for. So Nathan talked. He told her about the ranch, about the creek that ran year-round even in drought, about the cabin he'd built with his own hands after bringing Sarah West as a bride. He told her about Lila's first steps, her first words, the way she'd started reading at 4 years old with a hunger for stories that reminded him of Eleanor's letters. He told her about the garden plot that had sat untended since Sarah died, about the piano in the parlor that hadn't been played in 2 years, about the silence in the house that felt like a living thing. We need you, he said quietly, his hand covering hers on the coverlet. Not just because Lila needs a mother, though God knows she does, but because I need... He paused, searching for honesty. I need someone who chose this, who chose me, chose us, knowing full well what she was walking into. Sarah, she loved me, but she never quite forgave Wyoming for being hard, for being lonely, for taking her second child before it could draw breath. Eleanor's head turned slightly toward his voice, though her eyes remained closed. But you knew it would be hard, Nathan continued. Your letters said so. You wrote that you wanted challenge instead of comfort, purpose instead of safety. Well, here's your challenge, Eleanor Hayes. Here's where you prove those weren't just pretty words on paper. Her hand twitched under his. Once. Twice. That's right. You fight. You crawl if you have to, just like you did in that canyon. You crawl toward us and we'll meet you halfway. The night stretched endless. Lila had finally fallen asleep on the small sofa in Morrison's parlor, covered with a quilt Mrs. Henderson had brought. The town slept around them, oblivious to the battle being waged in a single sick room. Nathan kept his vigil, changing cloths, dribbling water between Eleanor's lips when she was conscious enough to swallow, talking to her when silence felt too much like giving up. Near dawn, her breathing changed. The rapid, shallow panting eased into something deeper, more regular. Nathan pressed his palm to her forehead and felt the difference immediately. Still warm, but no longer burning. The fever had broken. He sagged back in his chair, relief making his muscles liquid. She wasn't safe yet. Infection could still claim her. Complications could still arise. But she'd cleared the first terrible hurdle. Eleanor's eyes opened as the first gray light crept through the window. This time they focused on him immediately, clear despite exhaustion. You stayed. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was hers, rational, present. Where else would I be? Sensible men don't sit vigil for mail-order brides they've never met. Sensible men don't agree to marry women based on letters either. Seems we're both past sensible. The corner of her mouth twitched. Might have been a smile if she'd had the strength for it. How long? 3 days since we brought you in. 7 since the crash. Lila? Asleep in the next room. She's been here the whole time. Drove Morrison half crazy with questions about infection and bone setting and fever management. I think she's planning to become a doctor. This time Eleanor definitely smiled, though it faded quickly as pain reasserted itself. My legs? Nathan hesitated, Truth or comfort? Eleanor's eyes told him she wanted the former. Both broken. Multiple fractures. Morrison says the left might heal clean if you're lucky. The right couldn't quite finish the sentence. Might not. Eleanor completed it for him, her voice steady despite the devastation of the words. Might never walk right again. Might lose it entirely if infection sets in. Yes. She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze drifting to the window where dawn was painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. I crawled 20 feet in 4 days. Thought I was moving fast. Thought I was conquering distance. A harsh sound that might have been laughter. Turns out I barely moved at all. You moved enough. You survived. To what end? A crippled wife is a poor bargain, Mr. Cole. The formality of his name stung more than it should have. Nathan, if you're going to insult yourself, at least do me the courtesy of using my given name. Her eyes cut back to him, sharp despite exhaustion. Nathan, then. You contracted for a helpmate, not an invalid. I release you from any obligation my letters implied. The hell you do? He leaned forward, keeping his voice low so as not to wake Lila. You don't get to crawl through the desert to keep a promise, then quit the moment it gets inconvenient. That's not how this works. This isn't inconvenient. This is impossible. I can't run a household. Can't help with ranch work. Can't what? Can't survive 4 days with broken legs in a canyon? Can't drag yourself across rock when any sensible person would have died where they fell? You've already done impossible, Eleanor. Don't tell me you can't do hard. She stared at him, something fierce flickering behind the pain in her eyes. You don't know what you're asking for. I know exactly what I'm asking for. I'm asking for what you promised in your letters, partnership. Someone who endures. Someone who chooses to be here even when here is difficult. He caught her hand again, those raw, damaged fingers that had clawed at stone. You think I care if you walk or not? I care that you kept fighting when fighting was all you had left. That's the woman I want beside me. Everything else, we'll figure out as we go. Tears tracked down Eleanor's temples into her hair. Not the delirium of fever, but something rawer. Hope warring with despair. Possibility wrestling fear. I wanted to arrive on time, she whispered. Wanted to step off that stage looking capable and confident. Wanted to prove I could be what you needed. You proved it in that canyon. Everything after is just details. The door creaked. Lila stood in the doorway, her braids disheveled, her dress wrinkled from sleeping in it. She looked at Eleanor with solemn evaluation, then padded across the room on bare feet. You're awake, Lila announced. Papa said you were very sick, but you might get better. Are you getting better? Eleanor's face transformed, softening in ways Nathan hadn't seen even in the depths of fever. I think so, sweetheart. Thanks to your papa finding me. And me. I rode with him. I helped. This was stated as simple fact without boasting. Then I owe you my life, Miss Lila. That's a serious debt. Lila considered this gravely. You don't have to pay it back all at once. Papa says debts between family are different than debts with strangers. Family just helps because that's what family does. The word hung in the air. Family. Presumptuous for a child to declare, perhaps. But Lila had never been a typical child, and loss had taught her to claim love when she found it, rather than wait for permission. Eleanor's breath caught. Is that what we are? Family? Lila looked to Nathan, seeking confirmation for what she already knew to be true. He nodded slowly. Yes, Lila said with satisfaction. Papa asked you to marry him in letters, and you said yes in letters, and you came all this way to be my new mama. That makes us family, even if you can't walk yet. The yet in that sentence held more faith than Nathan had felt in 2 years. His daughter, who'd watched her mother die, who'd learned too young that love came with no guarantees, had chosen to believe in Eleanor Hayes before ever meeting her. And now, seeing the broken reality instead of the imagined arrival, she chose to believe still. Eleanor's hand found Lila's, squeezing gently. Then I suppose I'd better heal up properly. Can't have family worrying. You can worry us a little bit, Lila said generously, but not too much. Morrison arrived an hour later to find his patient awake, and arguing with Nathan about the necessity of laudanum for pain. The doctor's relief was visible, though his examination remained thorough and his prognosis cautious. "Fever's broken, which is the first good news I've had to deliver in days," Morrison said, rewrapping Eleanor's legs with practiced efficiency. "But you're not out of danger yet, Miss Hayes. The right leg concerns me. Infection could still set in deep, and even if it doesn't, the bones—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "The bones may not knit clean. You need to prepare yourself for the possibility of permanent damage." "I'm aware." Eleanor's voice was steady. "Whatever comes, I'll adapt." Spoken like someone who hasn't spent months learning to walk again, Morrison's tone gentled. "I'm not trying to crush hope, Miss Hayes. I'm trying to prepare you for reality. Recovery will be long and painful. You'll need constant care, help with every basic function. You'll need patience and stubbornness in equal measure." "Lucky for her, we've got both in abundance," Nathan said from the doorway. Morrison glanced between them, reading something in the air that made him nod slowly. "I suppose you do at that. Well then, she can't be moved for at least a week, probably 2. After that, if there's no fever recurrence, she could be transported to your ranch. But she'll need a proper bed, assistance with—" "We'll manage," Nathan interrupted. "Whatever she needs, we'll manage." The doctor packed his bag, gave strict instructions about wound care and signs of infection to watch for, then paused at the door. "Mr. Cole, a word?" They stepped into the hallway. Morrison kept his voice low. "You understand what you're taking on. This isn't a temporary situation. Even in the best case, she's looking at months of recovery, more likely a year or more. She may never walk without assistance. She may never—" "I know what I'm taking on." "Do you?" "Because I've seen men marry healthy women and abandon them the moment illness struck. And you're proposing to bring a near stranger into your home, someone who'll need constant care, who can't contribute to household labor, who might be permanently—" "She crawled for 4 days to keep her word." Nathan's voice went hard. "That tells me more about her character than a year of Sunday dinners ever could. She's not a stranger. She's the woman who chose us when she could have chosen safety." Morrison studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but you need to know, the town's already talking, speculation about who she is, why you rode out looking for her, whether this is all some elaborate scheme. Mrs. Henderson's doing her best to shut down gossip, but you know how people are." Nathan did know. Small towns ran on gossip the way mills ran on water. "Let them talk." "They're saying you've taken up with a crippled mail-order bride sight unseen, that you're a fool or desperate or both." "They're half right. I am desperate. Desperate for someone who keeps their promises, someone who doesn't quit when things get hard. If that makes me a fool, so be it." Morrison clapped him on the shoulder. "Then you're a fool in good company. I'll check on her again this evening." The days that followed established a rhythm. Nathan spent mornings at the ranch, handling the work that couldn't be postponed, feeding stock, checking fences, the 100 small tasks that kept a working ranch operational. Lila stayed with Eleanor, chattering away about everything and nothing, reading aloud from the books Mrs. Henderson brought, helping change water glasses and adjust pillows with a 6-year-old's earnest diligence. Afternoons, Nathan returned to town, bringing fresh clothes, reports of ranch life, news from the wider world that arrived via the irregular mail. He sat with Eleanor while Lila napped, their conversations building bridges between the people they'd been in letters and the people they were becoming in person. "You wrote that you played piano," Nathan said one afternoon, watching her fingers tap restlessly on the coverlet. "Taught it for 15 years. Every proper young lady in Baltimore learned scales in my front parlor." Eleanor's mouth twisted. "I was good enough to teach, not good enough to perform. The story of my life, really. Always sufficient, never exceptional." "You don't think crawling 20 feet with broken legs is exceptional?" "That wasn't exceptional. That was stubborn refusal to die in a ditch. There's a difference." "Is there?" Nathan leaned back in his chair, genuinely curious. "Seems to me stubborn refusal to quit is about the most exceptional quality a person can have. Talent is cheap. Persistence is rare." Eleanor turned her head to look at him fully, and he saw her reevaluating, adjusting her understanding of who he was beyond the careful prose of letters. "You really believe that?" "I do. Sarah was talented at damn near everything, sewing, cooking, keeping house. But when things got hard, when the winter was brutal or the summer dry, when loneliness ate at her, she didn't have stubbornness to fall back on. She had talent and gentleness and love, but not the particular kind of meanness it takes to look Wyoming in the face and refuse to blink first. It was the most he'd said about his first wife since her death. Eleanor absorbed it in silence, understanding what he wasn't saying, that love hadn't been enough, that capability mattered as much as affection, that partnership required certain hardnesses as well as softnesses. "The piano at the ranch," she said finally. "Does it work?" "Haven't touched it in 2 years. Might need tuning." "When I can sit upright for more than 10 minutes without passing out, I'd like to try it." "When you can sit upright, you'll try whatever you damn well please." Eleanor laughed, an actual laugh, startled out of her by his vehemence. "You're not what I expected, Nathan Cole. Neither are you, Eleanor Hayes, but I'm thinking that's working in our favor." By the end of the second week, Eleanor could sit propped up without dizziness, could eat solid food without nausea, could stay awake for hours at a stretch. Morrison declared the infection beaten back, for now, and agreed she was stable enough to be moved. "But carefully," he warned. "Any jostling could re-break those bones before they've had a chance to set properly. You'll need a wagon, not a horse, padding, slow pace." Nathan borrowed the Hendersons' freight wagon, lined it with every blanket and quilt the town's women could spare, and drove it to Morrison's house on a cool morning when the road would be at its smoothest. Lila rode beside him, bouncing with an excitement she tried unsuccessfully to contain. "Miss Eleanor is coming home," she announced to everyone they passed. Really home this time. Moving Eleanor from bed to wagon required 4 people: Nathan, Morrison, Henderson, and the Smithy's wife who had experience as a midwife. Eleanor bore it with gritted teeth and blanched face, but she didn't cry out, didn't beg them to stop. When she was finally settled in the wagon bed, surrounded by pillows and secured with ropes to prevent rolling, she looked exhausted but grimly satisfied. "One more impossible thing accomplished," she said. "Getting good at those," Nathan replied. The journey to the ranch took 3 hours for a distance he normally covered in 1. Every rut in the road required navigation, every slope demanded caution. Lila sat in the wagon bed beside Eleanor, holding her hand through the worst jolts, keeping up a steady stream of description. "That's where the Hendersons live. That's where the creek crosses under the road. That's where Papa says coyotes sing at night, but I'm not allowed to go listen because they're wild. That's the turnoff to our ranch. See? Just another mile." The cabin came into view as afternoon sun slanted across the valley, a solid log structure with a wide porch, weathered but well-maintained, smoke curling from the chimney where Nathan had left a fire banked that morning. Beyond it stretched corrals, a barn, outbuildings that spoke of a working ranch rather than a showplace. The creek Lila had mentioned ran silver through the eastern pasture, lined with cottonwoods just beginning to turn yellow with early autumn. Eleanor took it all in with eyes that saw past the humble presentation to the potential beneath. "It's beautiful." "It's remote," Nathan corrected. "Nearest neighbor is 5 miles. Town is 12. Winter will lock us in for weeks at a time." "Good." Eleanor's voice held fierce satisfaction. "I spent 32 years living in other people's pockets. I'm ready for space." Getting her into the house and settled in the bedroom required another careful transfer. Nathan had prepared as best he could: clean sheets, water pitcher, bedside table arranged with necessities. But seeing Eleanor in Sarah's former space, in the bed where his first wife had died, created a strange doubling of time. Past and future occupying the same space, grief and hope tangled together like creek water over stones. Eleanor saw it in his face. This was her room. Our room, yes. "Does it bother you, me being here?" Nathan set the last pillow in place, taking his time to answer honestly. "I thought it would. I thought I'd see her ghost in every corner, but I don't. I just see you, here and alive, which seems like enough miracle for 1 season." Eleanor's hand found his. "Tell me about her sometime. Not now, but eventually. I want to know the woman who made Lila, who chose this place first. She'd have liked you, I think. You're braver than she was, stubborn where she was gentle, but she valued truth the way you do. That matters more than similarity. Lila appeared in the doorway with an armful of wildflowers, already willing in her grip. "I picked these for your room, Miss Eleanor, to make it pretty." Eleanor accepted them with appropriate solemnity, and Nathan found a jar to serve as vase, and together they arranged the flowers on the bedside table. It was such a small thing, such an ordinary domestic moment. But after 2 weeks of hospital rooms and fear, ordinary felt like grace. That night, after Lila had fallen asleep and the house had settled into its familiar creaks and sighs, Nathan sat in the chair beside Eleanor's bed. She was awake, staring at the ceiling with the particular stillness of someone thinking too hard. "Regretting your choice yet?" he asked. "Every hour." But her tone held no regret, only rueful acknowledgement. "Every hour I think about how much easier it would have been to stay in Baltimore, to accept spinsterhood, to live a small, safe life. But I didn't crawl through hell to turn back now." Nathan smiled in the darkness. "No, I suppose you didn't." Outside, a coyote called across the valley, the wild sound Lila longed to hear up close. Another answered from a different direction. The creek murmured its endless conversation with stones. The ranch breathed around them, alive in the way only inhabited places could be. Eleanor turned her head to look at him. "I can't marry you yet. Not like this. Not when I can't even stand for the ceremony. I wasn't aware I'd proposed." "Your letters proposed. Mine accepted. We're technically engaged, though under rather unusual circumstances." "Then we stay engaged until you're ready. No rush. The important part, you being here, us figuring out how this works, that's already happening." "What if I'm never ready? What if these legs never heal right?" "Then we figure it out anyway. Marriage is a piece of paper, Eleanor. What matters is the choosing, and you already chose." She was quiet for so long he thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, "Nathan?" "Yes?" "Thank you for searching, for not leaving me in that canyon. Thank you for giving me something worth searching for." The words hung in the dark space between them. Not quite love, not yet, but something solid enough to build on. Something chosen deliberately, brick by brick, word by word, day by impossible day. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Learning to navigate a household with an invalid, teaching Lila patience, fighting the gossip that would surely come, facing the possibility that Eleanor's legs might never fully heal, that their partnership would be defined by limitation as much as possibility. But tonight, they had this: a woman who'd crawled through hell to keep her promise, a man who'd ridden into the desert to honor his, and a child who believed in both of them with a faith stronger than doubt. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The first morning brought rain. It drummed on the roof with a persistence that matched Eleanor's determination during those 4 days in the canyon, washing the valley in sheets of gray that turned the distant mountains into ghosts. Nathan woke to the sound and lay still for a moment, listening to water find every crack in the eaves, every weakness in the structure he'd built with his own hands. Beside him in the other room, he could hear Lila's small snores, the child's sleep deep and unburdened despite everything that had changed. Eleanor's room was silent. He rose and dressed quickly, moving through the cold house to stoke the fire that had died to embers overnight. The kitchen took shape in pre-dawn dimness, the table Sarah had insisted on bringing from her mother's house, the shelves he'd built to her specifications, the window that looked east toward sunrise. Everything here held memory, but this morning the memories felt less like ghosts and more like foundation, something to build on rather than be haunted by. He made coffee, the familiar ritual grounding him, then carried a cup to Eleanor's door. A soft knock. No answer. He eased the door open, half expecting to find her asleep, but her eyes were already open, fixed on the ceiling with an intensity that suggested she'd been awake for hours. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Couldn't stop thinking." Eleanor's voice carried the rough edge of exhaustion. "About everything I can't do, everything I used to take for granted." Nathan set the coffee on her bedside table and settled into the chair that had become his customary position. "Such as?" "Walking to a window to watch the rain. Standing to dress myself. Going to the outhouse without needing to be carried like an infant." Her hands fisted in the quilt. "I've been here one night, and I already feel like a burden you'll regret taking on. You done feeling sorry for yourself, or should I come back later? Eleanor's head snapped toward him, shock widening her eyes. Excuse me? You heard me. Self-pity doesn't suit you, Eleanor Hayes. Didn't suit you in that canyon when you had actual reason for it, and it sure doesn't suit you now with a roof over your head and people who want you here. I can't even use a chamber pot without help. So? You think that makes you less valuable? Less worthy of being here? Nathan leaned forward, his voice steady but hard. Every person in this house has needed help at some point. Lila needed help learning to walk, to talk, to feed herself. I needed help after Sarah died, when grief had me so turned around I couldn't figure out which end of the day was up. Needing help is just being human. It's not shame unless you make it shame. Eleanor stared at him, something shifting behind her eyes, anger giving way to something more vulnerable. I wanted to be useful, to contribute. Instead, I'm just taking. You're healing. That's different than taking. He picked up the coffee cup and pressed it into her hands, steadying it when her grip wavered. And you want to know the truth? Having you here, even like this, is better than the silence this house held for 2 years. Lila talks more, smiles more. She's got purpose again. Helping you gives her something to focus on besides missing her mother. That's not fair to her, making a child responsible for... I'm not making her responsible for anything. She chose this, same as you chose to come west, same as I chose to search for you. We're all choosing, Eleanor. Every morning we wake up and choose to be here, to do this hard thing together. You don't get to take that choice away from us just because you're scared. The words hit like stones thrown in still water, ripples spreading outward. Eleanor's fingers tightened on the coffee cup, her jaw working as she fought for composure. I am scared, she admitted finally. Terrified. What if these legs never work right? What if I'm like this forever? Then you're like this forever and we figure it out. But you don't know that yet. Morrison says it could take a year or more to see what you're working with. So right now, today, your job is to heal. Drink your coffee. Let Lila read to you. Let me help you with whatever you need. And stop deciding the ending before the middle's even happened. Outside, the rain intensified, wind driving it against the windows in waves. Eleanor sipped her coffee, and Nathan watched the internal war play out across her face, pride battling pragmatism, fear wrestling hope. Finally, she nodded once, sharp and decisive. All right, but I want to try things. Even if I fail. Even if it's humiliating. I need to know what I can and can't do, not just accept limitation without testing it. Fair enough? What do you want to try first? Sitting up on my own, without help. Nathan stood and stepped back, giving her room. Go ahead. What followed was brutal to watch. Eleanor braced her hands on the mattress and pushed, her face contorting with effort and pain. She made it perhaps 6 inches before her arms gave out, and she collapsed back against the pillows, breathing hard. Again, she gasped. Eleanor, again. This time she made it 8 inches, then 10. On the 4th attempt, she actually achieved something resembling upright before her strength failed and Nathan had to catch her to prevent a complete collapse that would jar her legs. Enough, he said firmly, easing her back down. You proved your point. Now rest before you undo Morrison's work. Eleanor's face was slick with sweat, her breathing ragged, but her eyes held a fierce satisfaction. I made it farther each time. That means something. It means you're stubborn as a Missouri mule. I already knew that. It means I'm not helpless. There's a difference. The door creaked. Lila stood there in her nightgown, her hair a wild tangle, her expression caught between worry and curiosity. Miss Eleanor, are you hurt? I heard noises. Just exercising, Eleanor managed, her voice steadier than Nathan expected. Trying to get stronger. Lila padded into the room, climbing onto the foot of the bed with practiced care to avoid Eleanor's splinted legs. Can I help? I'm good at exercises. Papa makes me do them every morning. Stretches and things. What kind of stretches? For shoulders and arms and legs. Papa says a ranch needs strong people, so we have to keep our bodies working right. Lila demonstrated, raising her arms above her head and bending side to side with the unselfconscious flexibility of childhood. Eleanor watched with an expression Nathan couldn't quite read. "Do you think your papa would teach me? The ones I could do from bed?" "Of course he will. Papa's good at teaching. He taught me to ride and rope and lots of things." Lila's confidence in her father was absolute, unquestioned. And so began a new rhythm. Each morning before breakfast, Nathan led Eleanor through gentle movements, ankle rotations, arm raises, core exercises that wouldn't stress her broken legs. Lila joined in, turning it into a game, counting repetitions with earnest solemnity. It hurt Eleanor. That much was obvious, but she never complained, never asked to stop before the count was complete. The days settled into patterns. Nathan worked the ranch in morning and evening, the hours when stock needed tending and chores couldn't wait. Midday he returned to the house, helping Eleanor with necessities she couldn't manage alone, sitting with her while Lila napped, talking about everything and nothing. Eleanor proved to have strong opinions about horse breeding, crop rotation, and the proper way to organize a root cellar. Nathan found himself arguing with her about fence placement and water rights, the debate sharp but never cruel, both of them enjoying the clash of minds. "You're wrong about the south pasture," Eleanor said one afternoon, her tone absolutely certain despite never having seen the land in question. "If you're getting standing water there every spring, the drainage is wrong. You need to dig a channel to redirect flow before it turns the whole section into bog. And you know this because of your extensive ranching experience in Baltimore?" Nathan's tone was dry, but not dismissive. "I know this because I read agricultural journals, land management treatises, anything I could get my hands on while I was preparing to come west. Did you think I'd arrive completely ignorant? I think most people don't read engineering manuals for fun. Most people are boring." Nathan laughed, surprised by the quick warmth that spread through his chest. "Can't argue with that." Lila absorbed everything, her 6-year-old mind cataloging this new normal with remarkable adaptability. She helped Eleanor with tasks that small hands could manage, fetching water, arranging flowers, reading aloud from the books that Mrs. Henderson sent out from town. But she also gave Eleanor space, seeming to understand instinctively when the woman needed silence more than company. "She's remarkable," Eleanor said one evening after Lila had taken herself off to bed without being asked. "You've raised her beautifully." Mostly she raised herself. After Sarah died, I was so lost in grief I barely functioned. Lila kept us both alive, reminding me to eat, to sleep, to do the basic tasks that keep a household running. No child should have to be that responsible that young. "No," Eleanor agreed, "but maybe it gave her strength she'll need later. Life doesn't care if we're ready for hard things." "Is that what Baltimore taught you? To be ready for hard things?" Eleanor's expression shifted, something bitter crossing her face. "Baltimore taught me that comfort is a cage, that safety can suffocate just as surely as danger can kill. My parents loved me, but they loved me like you'd love a useful piece of furniture, necessary, but not particularly valued for anything beyond function." "That why you taught piano? To be useful?" "That's why I did everything, cooked their meals, managed their household, nursed them through final illnesses. Because useful things get kept, treasured things get fought for, but I was never treasured, just sufficient." The pain in those words made Nathan's chest ache. He thought of Sarah, who he'd treasured but perhaps not partnered with the way she'd needed. Of Eleanor, who'd spent 32 years being useful but not valued, of all the ways people could fail each other without meaning to. "You're treasured here," he said quietly. "By Lila, certainly. By me, in ways I'm still figuring out. But treasured. Not for being useful, but for being you." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears that didn't fall. "You barely know me." "I know you kept your word when breaking it would have been easier. I know you fight when fighting seems pointless. I know you challenge me instead of deferring to me, which is worth more than a dozen useful wives." He reached across the space between them, his hand finding hers. "I know enough, Eleanor. The rest we'll learn as we go." The weeks blurred together, marked by small victories and stubborn setbacks. Eleanor learned to sit upright for an hour without dizziness, then 2 hours, then half a day. Morrison visited weekly, his examinations growing less grim as infection stayed at bay, and bones began the slow work of knitting themselves whole. "The left leg is healing clean," he announced in late September. "Another month and I'd say you could start putting minimal weight on it with crutches. The right—" He paused, and Eleanor's face went carefully blank. "The right is more complicated. The breaks weren't clean, and there's damage to the knee joint that concerns me. Even after it heals, you may have limited mobility, permanent limp at minimum. But I'll walk. Eventually, with assistance. But Eleanor, you need to understand I understand perfectly." Her voice cut across his caution like a blade. "I'll walk. Maybe not easily, maybe not gracefully, but I'll walk. That's enough." After Morrison left, Nathan found Eleanor staring out the bedroom window at the valley turning gold with autumn. She didn't turn when he entered, but her spine was rigid with tension. "Say it," she said. "Say what?" "Whatever you're thinking, that you signed up for a wife who could help run a ranch, not a cripple who'll need a cane for the rest of her life." "I'm thinking Morrison's seen worse injuries heal better than expected. I'm thinking you've got more fight in you than 10 normal people. And I'm thinking that woman who crawled through the desert isn't going to let a bad knee stop her from doing whatever she decides needs doing." Eleanor's shoulders loosened fractionally. "You're infuriatingly optimistic. Someone has to be. You're taking up all the space for stubborn determination." She did turn then, and her face held a complexity of emotions he was learning to read: gratitude and frustration, hope and fear, all tangled together like barbed wire. "I want to marry you." The statement landed between them like a stone thrown in still water. "That's so?" Nathan kept his voice even, though his pulse kicked up. "Not because I owe you, not out of obligation or gratitude, but because in 3 weeks of living here, I've felt more valued, more seen, more myself than in 32 years in Baltimore. Because Lila deserves a mother who chooses to be here, not one who's trapped by circumstance. Because you—" She paused, searching for words. "Because you argue with me about fence lines, and don't treat me like glass that'll shatter, and I think I could build a real life with someone like that. Even though you can't stand for the ceremony yet? Especially because of that. I don't want to wait until I'm healed. I want you to marry me now, like this. Broken legs and uncertain future and all. I want it on record that you chose me when I was at my worst, not my best." Nathan crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, bringing himself eye level with her. "Eleanor Hayes, I chose you the moment I read your first letter. Everything since has just been confirmation. But I need to know you're not doing this out of fear that I'll change my mind once you're healed. I'm doing this because I've spent my whole life waiting for the right time, the right circumstances, the right everything, and I'm done waiting. I want to choose something imperfect and real instead of holding out for some fantasy that'll never come. Then we'll marry, but on your terms, however you want it done." Eleanor's hand found his face, her palm rough from those 4 days of crawling across stone. "No church. No town ceremony with people gawking. Just us, Lila, and whoever we need to make it legal, in this house, in the life we're building, simple and honest." "Simple and honest," Nathan agreed. "I'll ride to town tomorrow, talk to Reverend Mitchell about coming out. Should be able to arrange something for this weekend if that suits you." "This weekend." Eleanor tested the words, then nodded. "Yes. Before I lose my nerve or Morrison finds some new reason why I shouldn't stress myself." The news spread through Clearwater faster than prairie fire. Nathan had barely finished talking to Reverend Mitchell before Mrs. Henderson appeared with fabric for a dress, before the smithy's wife offered to bring her fiddle for music, before half the town had invited themselves to witness the unlikely union of a widowed rancher and the mail-order bride who'd crawled through hell to reach him. "No," Nathan said firmly when Henderson suggested they move the ceremony to town. "Eleanor wants it at the ranch, just family and whoever's necessary. But the whole town the whole town can want whatever they please. This is about Eleanor and me and Lila, not spectacle." Mrs. Henderson, bless her, understood. She shooed the gossips away and showed up at the ranch 3 days before the ceremony with fabric, thread, and a determination to make Eleanor a dress that could be altered to accommodate splinted legs. "Can't have you marrying in a nightgown," she declared, spreading fabric across Eleanor's lap. "What's your favorite color?" "I don't—" Eleanor paused. "No one's ever asked me that before." Well, I'm asking now. Blue, deep blue, like twilight. Mrs. Henderson smiled. Then twilight blue it is. The dress took shape over 2 days of careful sewing, Eleanor directing alterations from her bed, Lila threading needles and fetching scissors with solemn importance. It wouldn't be traditional, the skirt designed to drape over splints, the bodice fitted to accommodate a woman who couldn't stand for long, but it was beautiful in its practicality, in the way it honored Eleanor exactly as she was. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and cold, autumn asserting itself with frost that turned the grass silver. Nathan rose before dawn and set about transforming the small parlor into something worthy of the occasion. He moved furniture, laid down the good rug Sarah's mother had sent, arranged wildflowers Lila had gathered the day before into jars that caught the light. Simple preparations, but they turned the room from everyday to sacred. Reverend Mitchell arrived at noon, a thin man with kind eyes who'd buried Sarah and baptized Lila and never once suggested Nathan was making a mistake. He greeted Eleanor with the same courtesy he'd show any bride, asking about her comfort, whether she needed anything before they began. "Just to get on with it before I lose my nerve," Eleanor said. Morrison came as witness, along with Mrs. Henderson and her husband. Lila wore her Sunday best, her braids tied with ribbon, her face grave with the importance of the moment. They gathered in the parlor with its makeshift decorations, the fire crackling in the hearth, afternoon light slanting through windows to paint everything gold. Eleanor sat in the chair Nathan had positioned for her blue dress arranged carefully, her hair swept up in a style Mrs. Henderson had managed despite working around injuries. She looked nothing like the conventional bride, no veil, no train, no ability to stand beside her groom, but her eyes held a certainty that transcended tradition. Nathan stood beside her chair, his hand finding hers as Reverend Mitchell opened his Bible. "We gather today in witness to a covenant between Nathan Cole and Eleanor Hayes," the Reverend began, his voice filling the small room. "A covenant not born of convenience, but of choice. Not guaranteed ease, but promising partnership. Not waiting for perfect circumstances, but embracing imperfect reality." The familiar words of the ceremony flowed around them, but Nathan barely heard them. He was too focused on Eleanor's face, on the way her fingers gripped his with surprising strength, on the realization that this woman who'd been a stranger 6 weeks ago was about to become his wife. "Nathan, do you take Eleanor to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do you part?" "I do." The words came easy, certain. "Eleanor, do you take Nathan to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do you part?" Eleanor's voice rang clear despite the emotion roughening its edges. "I do." "The rings?" Lila stepped forward with the small box Nathan had entrusted to her, her movements careful as carrying eggs. Inside lay 2 simple gold bands, Sarah's original ring that Nathan had kept in a drawer for 2 years, and a new one he'd commissioned from the smithy for Eleanor. Different designs, different stories, but both representing the same promise. He slid the ring onto Eleanor's finger, and she did the same for him, their hands steady despite the magnitude of what they were doing. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. Nathan, you may kiss your bride." Nathan knelt again, bringing himself to Eleanor's level, and kissed her gently. Her lips were soft, warm, trembling slightly against his. Not passion, not yet, but promise. The beginning of something being built brick by deliberate brick. When they pulled apart, Eleanor's eyes were bright with tears that didn't fall. "We did it." "We did." Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "No taking it back now." "Wouldn't dream of it." Lila launched herself at both of them, her small arms wrapping around whatever she could reach, her voice muffled against Eleanor's dress. "You're my mama now. Really, truly my mama." Eleanor's hand found the child's hair, stroking gently. "Really, truly. If that's what you want." "It's what I want. I've been wanting it since Papa first told me you were coming." The witnesses offered congratulations. Mrs. Henderson producing a cake she'd somehow smuggled in, Henderson breaking out the whiskey for a toast. But the celebration stayed small and genuine, exactly as Eleanor had wanted. No spectacle, no performance, just a handful of people bearing witness to choice and commitment. As evening settled over the valley and their guests departed, Nathan helped Eleanor to bed, the blue dress carefully removed and hung for safekeeping. She looked exhausted but content, her body pushed past comfortable limits by the day's events. "Thank you," she said as he adjusted the quilts around her. "For what?" "For marrying me like this. For not waiting until I was healed. For choosing imperfect reality instead of holding out for some imaginary perfect version." Nathan settled into the chair that had become his customary position. "Eleanor Cole, there's nothing imperfect about today. It was exactly what it needed to be." Her eyes widened slightly. "Eleanor Cole. I hadn't thought. I'll have to get used to that name." "Take your time. You've got the rest of your life to practice." She smiled, and in that smile, Nathan saw the future they were building together. Not easy, not simple, but real. Built on choice and stubbornness and the particular strength it took to keep promises even when the cost was high. Outside, the first stars emerged in a darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The ranch settled into its evening rhythms, and in the small bedroom at the heart of it all, two people who'd chosen each other against probability and logic simply sat together in comfortable silence. The woman who'd crawled through hell had made it home. The man who'd searched beyond hope had found what he was looking for. And the child who'd lost one mother had gained another through deliberate choice rather than biological accident. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything that mattered. And tomorrow they would wake up married and begin the next impossible thing, learning to build a life together, one stubborn day at a time. Winter came early that year, arriving in November with snow that buried the valley under 2 feet of white silence. Nathan woke to it on a Tuesday morning, the peculiar muffled quality of snowfall telling him what had happened before he even looked out the window. The ranch was cut off now, would be for weeks, maybe months depending on how hard the season hit. No trips to town, no visitors, just the three of them and whatever resources they'd managed to stockpile. Eleanor was already awake when he checked on her, propped against pillows with a book in her lap. 2 months married, and he still wasn't used to the sight of her in his house, in his life, real and solid and stubbornly present. "It snowed," she said without looking up from her reading. "About 2 feet worth. We're locked in until it melts or I can dig us a path to the main road." "Good." She turned a page. "I was getting tired of Mrs. Henderson's weekly visits and her thinly veiled inspections to see if you're regretting your choice yet." Nathan crossed to the window, looking out at the transformed landscape. "Are you? Regretting it? Being snowed in with you and Lila for months on end with no escape? Ask me again in February." But her tone held warmth. The particular dryness he'd learned meant she was content despite the words. The truth was, they'd settled into married life with surprising ease, finding rhythms that worked around Eleanor's limitations. She managed the household from her chair and increasingly from the crutches Morrison had provided, planning meals, directing Lila's education, keeping the accounts that Nathan had let slide into chaos after Sarah's death. He handled the physical labor of the ranch and the tasks Eleanor couldn't manage alone. Lila bridged the gaps, helping both, belonging to both, thriving in ways that made Nathan's chest ache with gratitude. But winter would test them. Close quarters, short days, the particular strain of isolation that made small irritations into major conflicts. Nathan had seen it break marriages stronger than theirs. "We'll need a system," Eleanor said, apparently following the same train of thought. "For privacy, for space. Just because we're trapped together doesn't mean we have to be in each other's pockets every moment." "What did you have in mind?" "You take mornings for yourself, check stock, do repairs, whatever you need. I'll handle Lila's lessons and household planning. Afternoons, we work together on whatever needs doing. Evenings are family time, dinner, reading, music if I can convince you to tune that piano. And if someone needs solitude, they take it without explanation or guilt." The clarity of her planning shouldn't have surprised him. Eleanor approached everything with the same methodical precision. But it still caught him off guard, the way she thought 3 steps ahead while he was still figuring out step 1. "Sounds reasonable. What about sleeping arrangements?" They'd been dancing around this question for 2 months. Eleanor still occupied the bedroom. Nathan had moved to a makeshift bed in the loft where he could hear Lila if she woke in the night. It was practical given Eleanor's injuries, but it also felt temporary, a placeholder for a conversation neither of them quite knew how to start. Eleanor's fingers stilled on her book. What about them? Winter means heating one room instead of multiple, means sharing warmth when the fire dies down at night, means, he paused, choosing words carefully, means we're married in name and law, but not yet in fact, and I'm asking if you want to change that, or if you'd rather wait until you're more healed. I can't. She stopped, frustration crossing her face. My legs still don't work properly. I can barely walk with crutches. I'm not exactly in a position to... Eleanor. He crossed to her chair, kneeling so they were eye level. I'm not asking if you can dance. I'm asking if you want your husband sharing your bed and your life in all the ways marriage implies, or if you need more time. There's no wrong answer. She met his eyes, and he saw the war playing out behind them, desire battling insecurity, wanting warring with fear of inadequacy. Her hand came up to touch his face, fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I want you in my bed, she said quietly, in my life, in all the ways that matter. But Nathan, I need you to understand, I don't know what I'm doing. Baltimore spinsters don't exactly get instruction in marital intimacy, and with my legs like this, I can't. We'll figure it out. He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. Same as we've figured out everything else. Together. No expectations except honesty. No timeline except what feels right. Relief flooded her face, followed by something that might have been anticipation. Tonight, then. Move your things down after Lila's asleep. The day passed in ordinary tasks made extraordinary by undercurrent. Nathan worked on winterizing the barn, his mind only half on the job, the other half cataloging the reality that tonight everything would shift. Eleanor directed Lila through lessons with unusual distraction, her eyes tracking Nathan's movements whenever he passed through the house. Lila, with the uncanny perception of children, noticed the change in atmosphere, but said nothing, simply watching her parents with grave curiosity. Evening brought an early darkness, the snow reflecting what little light remained to turn the world into shades of blue and silver. They ate dinner together as always, but the conversation felt different, weighted with awareness, with possibility, with the knowledge that their marriage was about to become real in ways it hadn't been yet. After Lila was settled in bed, after the house had gone quiet except for the pop and hiss of the fire, Nathan gathered his few belongings from the loft and carried them to the bedroom. Eleanor sat propped against pillows, her hair loose around her shoulders in a way he'd never seen it, the lamplight turning it to copper and gold. Second thoughts? She asked as he hesitated in the doorway. Just thinking how long I've wanted this. How patient you've been while I figured out if I was ready to let someone else into the space Sarah occupied. And are you? Ready? Nathan set his things down and began undressing with the unselfconscious ease of a man who'd worked his body hard enough to stop caring about modesty. I am. Are you? Ready to share your carefully organized space with someone who's going to disrupt your systems? Eleanor's eyes tracked his movements, and he saw her swallow hard. I think I can adapt. He extinguished the lamp and climbed into bed beside her, the mattress dipping under his weight. For a moment they simply lay there in darkness, the enormous step they were taking settling around them like the snow outside. I don't know how to do this, Eleanor whispered. Don't know what you expect or want, or... Nathan found her hand under the covers, lacing their fingers together. I expect honesty. I want you, and everything else we'll discover as we go. He rolled toward her, propped on one elbow so he could see her face in the dim glow from the banked fire. May I kiss you? You're my husband. You don't have to ask permission. I'll always ask. Permission isn't about legality, Eleanor. It's about respect. Her free hand came up to cup his face, drawing him down. Then yes, please. Kiss me. What followed was exploration, discovery, the tentative mapping of new territory. Nathan had experience, but he set it aside, letting Eleanor set the pace, following her cues. She was hesitant at first, then bolder, her hands finding the planes of his shoulders, his back, learning the geography of him the way she'd learned everything else, with determination and careful attention to detail. When he touched her, she startled, then melted, then made small sounds that drove him to distraction. Her legs were still splinted, still largely immobile, but they found ways to work around the limitation. He was careful, conscious of her pain, stopping when she winced, adjusting when she directed. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't the passionate union of dime novels. But it was real and honest and theirs. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Eleanor's head on his chest, his hand stroking idle patterns on her shoulder. The fire had died to embers, the room gone cold except where their bodies generated heat. "Well," Eleanor said finally, "that was awkward, imperfect, nothing like you imagined?" "Better than I imagined, because it was real, because you didn't treat me like glass or an obligation, because you—" She paused, searching for words. "Because you made me feel desired, chosen, not just tolerated." Nathan pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You are desired. You are chosen. Every day I wake up and choose you again, Eleanor Cole." She was quiet for so long he thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the darkness, fragile and brave. Nathan tightened his arm around her. "Good, because I'm already there. Have been since you told Morrison you'd walk again or die trying. Stubbornness does it for me, apparently." Eleanor laughed, the sound muffled against his chest. "Lucky for me, I have that in abundance." They drifted toward sleep together, warm despite the cold, content despite the isolation, building something solid in the quiet space between words. The weeks that followed established new patterns. Mornings, Nathan rose early to tend stock, breaking ice on water troughs, ensuring the animals survived the brutal cold. Eleanor managed the household from the kitchen table, her crutches leaning against the chair, Lila beside her working through arithmetic and reading. Afternoons, they tackled projects together, Nathan repairing tack while Eleanor mended clothing, both of them talking through ranch decisions, neither one deferring to the other, but rather hammering out compromises through debate. Eleanor's strength grew incrementally. By December, she could stand for 10 minutes without crutches, though her right leg still couldn't bear full weight. By January, she was walking short distances with a pronounced limp, her face set with determination every time she pushed herself a little farther. Nathan watched her fight for every inch of independence with the same fierce respect he'd felt when he found her in that canyon. "Stop staring," Eleanor said one afternoon, catching him watching as she made her slow, limping way across the kitchen. "Can't help it. You're impressive." "I'm barely mobile, but that's not impressive. It's pathetic." "You're walking." 3 months ago, Morrison said you might never manage it. I'd call that impressive." She paused at the counter, gripping it for support, and turned to face him. "Do you know what the worst part is? Not the pain, not the limitation, but the constant awareness that I'm not who you thought you were getting, that the woman in those letters could do things this version of me never will." Nathan set down the bridle he was oiling and crossed to her. "The woman in those letters was hiding, performing competence to make herself appealing. The woman standing in front of me is real, flawed and fighting and genuine. I'll take real over performance every single time. Even when real means I can't help with half the ranch work, when I can't ride out to check fence lines or help with calving or do any of the things a ranch wife should—" "What's a ranch wife should do?" Nathan interrupted. "Because near as I can tell, you're managing accounts I'd let turn into chaos, teaching Lila better than the town school ever did, planning meals and managing supplies. So we actually have enough to last the winter, arguing with me about breeding stock and water rights until I actually think through my decisions instead of just doing what I've always done. That sounds like exactly what a ranch wife should do." Eleanor's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back with visible effort. "You're infuriatingly good at this." "At what?" "At making me believe I'm enough, even when I'm very sure I'm not." He kissed her then, gentle and thorough, tasting salt from the tears she wouldn't let fall. "You're more than enough. You're everything I didn't know I needed." Lila's voice piped up from the table, breaking the moment. "Are you two going to kiss all day, or can we finish lessons? I want to get to the part about Lewis and Clark." They broke apart, Eleanor laughing despite herself. "Impatient child." "Patient child," Lila corrected. "I've been waiting 10 whole minutes while you talked about boring ranch stuff." Nathan returned to his chair and his tack, Eleanor limped back to the table, and they continued their day. But something had shifted, some final wall crumbling between them. They were building something real now, something that could weather isolation and hardship and the thousand small stresses that broke lesser partnerships. February arrived with a thaw that made Nathan think spring might come early, then a blizzard that buried that hope under 3 feet of new snow. They were trapped again, the cabin shrinking around them as the walls pressed closer. Lila grew restless, Eleanor snappish, Nathan irritable. The harmony they'd found began to fray at the edges. "I'm going out to check the stock," Nathan announced one gray afternoon when the silence in the house had grown oppressive. "It's not time yet," Eleanor said without looking up from her mending. "I don't care. I need air." "What you need is to stop stomping around like a caged bear. You're making Lila nervous." Nathan bit back the sharp response that rose to his lips. She was right, damn her, but that didn't make it easier to hear. "Fine. I'll take Lila with me. Fresh air will do us both good." Eleanor's hand stilled on the fabric. She needs to finish her lessons. She needs to move. We all do. An hour out in the snow won't kill her education. But it might kill her if the weather turns, or if she falls through ice on the creek, or if— "Eleanor," Nathan's voice came out sharper than he intended. "She's a ranch child, not a China doll. She knows how to handle weather and ice and every other danger Wyoming throws at us. Stop trying to protect her from the world she lives in." Silence fell like a stone, Eleanor's face going pale and then flushed. Lila looked between them with wide eyes, her book forgotten. "I'll just—" the child started. "Stay," Eleanor said, her voice tight. "Your father's right. I'm being overprotective. Go bundle up and help him with the stock. Just be careful." Nathan felt the argument hovering unspoken between them. All the things Eleanor wasn't saying about Sarah's death, about losing people you loved, about how fear could make you grip too tight. But this wasn't the time or place, not with Lila watching. "An hour," he said. "We'll be back before dark." Outside, the cold hit like a fist, clean and sharp after the stale warmth of the cabin. Lila trudged beside him through drifts that came up to her waist, her breath puffing white, her face already brighter for the exercise. "Is Mama mad at you?" she asked as they reached the barn. Mama. When had that started? Sometime in the past month, the transition from Miss Eleanor to simply Mama, so natural neither of them had remarked on it. Not mad. Scared. There's a difference. Scared of what? Nathan began breaking ice from the water trough, considering how much truth a 7-year-old could handle. Scared of losing people she loves. Your mother, your first mother, died when you were very young. Eleanor doesn't want to lose you the same way. Lila absorbed this, helping him scatter feed for the chickens that had huddled in the barn for warmth. But keeping people safe by not letting them do anything isn't really keeping them safe. It's just keeping them still. Out of the mouths of children. Nathan paused in his work, looking at his daughter with renewed appreciation. Where'd you learn wisdom like that? Mama tells me stories sometimes about when she lived in Baltimore and her parents kept her still for so long she forgot how to move. She says she doesn't want me to forget. So Eleanor understood her own tendencies, was trying to fight them even as fear made her grip tight. Nathan felt the anger that had driven him from the cabin drain away, replaced by compassion for the woman who'd lost so much and was terrified of losing more. Your mama's brave, he said quietly. Braver than she thinks she is. Sometimes brave people are scared too. They just keep moving anyway. Like when she crawled through the desert. Exactly like that. They finished the chores in comfortable silence, then returned to the cabin as promised. Eleanor was at the stove preparing dinner, her movements stiff with more than physical pain. Nathan sent Lila to wash up and crossed to his wife, his hand finding the small of her back. I'm sorry, he said. For what? You were right. I was for snapping at you, for not understanding where it was coming from. He turned her to face him, hands on her shoulders. Eleanor, I know you're scared. I know what it costs you to watch Lila venture out into a world that took Sarah, but you can't keep her in cotton wool. She needs to learn to be strong the way you're strong. Eleanor's composure cracked, tears finally spilling over. What if I can't do this? What if I'm not meant to be a mother? What if my fear ruins her the way my parents' caution ruined me? Then you keep fighting it. Same way you fight everything else. Same way you fought your way across a desert to get here. Nathan pulled her close, feeling her shake with the force of emotions finally released. You're not your parents, Eleanor. You broke free of their cage. You won't build one for Lila. How do you know? Because you're already aware of the danger. Because you're questioning yourself instead of assuming you know best. Because you love her enough to let her grow even when growing means risk. Eleanor clung to him, her face pressed against his chest, and Nathan held her through the storm. Marriage, he was learning, wasn't the easy partnership of good days. It was this, standing together through fear and doubt and the moments when you failed each other, then choosing to keep standing anyway. When Lila emerged clean and hungry, Eleanor had composed herself. Dinner was quiet but not strained, each of them processing the day's small crisis in their own way. After the dishes were cleared, Nathan retrieved the guitar he'd forgotten he owned, and Eleanor limped to the piano she'd been practicing on in stolen moments. Play something together? Lila suggested, sensing the need for harmony. They tried, fumbling through songs neither knew well, Nathan's rough voice blending with Eleanor's clear soprano. It wasn't professional, it wasn't even particularly good, but it was real, and it filled the cabin with something warmer than fire, something that pushed back against isolation and winter and fear. That night, lying in the darkness with Eleanor curled against his side, Nathan felt her fingers trace idle patterns on his chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For not letting me build cages, for calling me out when I need it, for—" She paused. "For loving me enough to see who I'm trying to become, not just who I've been." Nathan caught her hand, pressed it over his heart so she could feel its steady beat. "We're all becoming something new here, Eleanor. You're just brave enough to do it out loud." Outside, the wind howled through the valley, piling snow against the cabin walls, sealing them in their small, warm space. But inside, they'd found something stronger than walls, more enduring than winter. They'd found partnership built on honesty and stubbornness and the particular courage it took to keep choosing each other, even when choosing was hard. The woman who'd crawled through hell had learned to walk again. The man who'd searched beyond hope had learned to trust again. And the child who'd lost one mother had gained another who loved her fiercely enough to let her be strong. Spring would come eventually, the snow would melt, and the world would open up again. But the family they'd forged in isolation would endure, tempered by winter's test, proven strong enough to weather whatever came next. They had become real to each other in the way that mattered most. Not perfect, not without fear or flaw, but committed to the daily work of choosing love over comfort, truth over illusion, partnership over independence. And that, Nathan thought, as sleep pulled him under, was worth every impossible mile of the journey that had brought them here. Spring arrived like a promise kept, the snow retreating inch by stubborn inch until the valley emerged green and impossible. Eleanor stood on the porch without her crutches for the first time, her right leg still weak but bearing weight, her body remembering what it meant to stand upright and face the world on her own terms. "Look at you," Nathan said from the doorway, pride evident in every syllable. "Don't sound so surprised. I told Morrison I'd walk again." "You did. Doesn't make watching it happen any less remarkable." Eleanor turned to face him, and the movement was still careful, still compensating for damage that would never fully heal, but it was hers. She'd earned every painful step of the journey from broken to functional, and the accomplishment showed in the set of her shoulders, the lift of her chin. "I want to ride out to the south pasture today," she announced. "See this drainage problem you keep insisting doesn't exist." Nathan's eyebrows rose. "You haven't been on a horse since the accident. Then it's time. Unless you think I'm too fragile?" The challenge in her voice made him smile. 5 months married, and she still bristled at any suggestion of limitation, still pushed against boundaries the way she'd pushed against everything else in her life. It was exhausting and magnificent in equal measure. "I think you're about as fragile as barbed wire. But if you're getting on a horse, I'm riding with you. No arguments." "Wouldn't dream of it." They saddled 2 of the gentler mounts, Eleanor moving slowly but deliberately, refusing Nathan's help until absolutely necessary. Lila watched from the fence rail, her expression caught between excitement and concern. "Be careful, Mama," she called. "Always am, sweetheart. We'll be back before supper." Mounting was the hardest part. Eleanor's right leg simply wouldn't bend properly to reach the stirrup, and her balance wasn't what it had been. But she managed with grit and Nathan's steadying hand, settling into the saddle with visible relief. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Like freedom. Like I'm finally reclaiming the last piece of myself that the crash took." They rode out at a walk, Eleanor adjusting to the motion, relearning the rhythm her body had known before broken bones had rewritten what was possible. The valley spread around them in shades of green and gold, the creek running high with snowmelt, the mountains still crowned with white against an impossibly blue sky. Nathan watched Eleanor more than the landscape, reading the small tells that indicated pain or fatigue. But she sat straighter with every passing minute, her confidence building, her smile growing wider as the horse responded to her guidance. "There," he said finally, pointing to a section of the south pasture where water stood in pools despite the drainage he'd attempted. "That's the problem area." Eleanor studied it with the same analytical precision she brought to everything, her eyes tracking the slope, the soil composition, the way water naturally wanted to flow. "You need a deeper channel, and you're fighting the natural grade instead of working with it. Dig there," she pointed, following the contour line, and run it to connect with that existing wash. The water will do the rest. That's going to take a week of hard digging. Then it's a good thing we have all summer. Unless you enjoy having a bog in your best pasture?" Nathan laughed, the sound carrying across the empty land. "Our best pasture. You're a coal now, Eleanor. That means half this mess is yours to claim." Something shifted in her expression, a softening that transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "Our pasture, our ranch, our life. I like the sound of that." They sat their horses side by side, surveying the land they would work together, the future they were building acre by acre. The silence between them was comfortable, full of understanding that didn't require words. "Nathan?" Eleanor's voice had gone serious. "There's something I need to tell you, something I should have mentioned before we married, but I was afraid." She paused, gathering courage. "There's a reason I left Baltimore so suddenly, a reason beyond just wanting freedom." Nathan's chest tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "I'm listening." "There was a man, Chester Whitmore. He courted me for 6 months, made promises, led me to believe—" She stopped, her jaw working. "Then his family arranged a more advantageous match, a younger woman with better connections. He dropped me without explanation, and the whole neighborhood knew, watched, pitied me." "That why you answered my advertisement? Running from humiliation?" "Partly, but there's more." Eleanor's hands tightened on the reins. "Chester didn't take rejection well. When I told him I was leaving Baltimore, that I'd accepted a proposal from a Wyoming rancher, he threatened to follow, to expose me as a fortune hunter, a woman of loose morals, whatever lies would poison you against me before we'd even met." The words hung in the spring air, and Nathan felt anger kindle low in his gut. Not at Eleanor, but at the unnamed man who'd tried to cage her even in departure. "Did he follow through?" Nathan asked carefully. "I don't know. I left before I could find out. But Nathan, if he shows up here, if he tries to cause trouble, then we deal with it together, same as we deal with everything else." He reached across the distance between their horses to catch her hand. "Eleanor, I don't care about your past except as it shaped who you are now. And the woman you are now is worth 10 Chester Whitmores, 100. You say that without having met him. He's persuasive, charming. He could make you doubt. He could try. Wouldn't succeed." Nathan's voice went hard. "I found you in a canyon after you crawled for 4 days on broken legs. I watched you fight fever and infection and every reason to give up. I've spent 5 months married to the stubbornest, bravest woman in Wyoming. Some smooth-talking Baltimore dandy isn't going to undo that with pretty lies." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears that didn't fall, her grip on his hand almost painful in its intensity. "I was so afraid to tell you, afraid you'd think I used you as an escape, that my feelings weren't real. Are they real now?" More real than anything I've ever felt. I love you, Nathan Cole. Not because you rescued me, not because I needed escape, but because you see me, truly see me, and choose me anyway. Then that's all that matters. The rest is just noise. They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, the confession having cleared the air between them like a thunderstorm washing dust from the atmosphere. But Eleanor's warning about Chester Whitmore lodged in Nathan's mind like a splinter, and he found himself watching the horizon with new wariness. The trouble, when it came, arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in late May. Nathan was working on the drainage project Eleanor had mapped out. Lila was reading under the cottonwood by the creek, and Eleanor was in the house preparing dinner. The sound of hoofbeats brought Nathan's head up, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle he kept nearby when working far from the house. But it wasn't danger riding up the valley road. It was something worse. A well-dressed man on an expensive horse, his clothes marking him as Eastern money, his bearing suggesting someone who'd never worked a hard day in his life. Behind him rode a second man, harder looking, the type hired for muscle rather than conversation. Nathan set down his shovel and waited, letting them come to him, marking the way the well-dressed man's eyes swept the ranch with barely concealed disdain. "Help you, gentlemen?" Nathan kept his voice neutral. The well-dressed man dismounted with practiced grace, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Nathan Cole, I presume. I'm Chester Whitmore. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Every muscle in Nathan's body went tight, but he didn't move, didn't give this peacock the satisfaction of visible reaction. "Don't believe I do. This is my land, my stock, my equipment. Nothing here belongs to a stranger from Baltimore." "Not something, someone." Chester's smile turned predatory. "Eleanor Hayes, though I understand she's calling herself Eleanor Cole these days, in a mockery of legitimate marriage. My wife's name is Eleanor Cole, legal and binding, witnessed and recorded, nothing mock about it." "Your wife." Chester's laugh was ugly. "Did she tell you about us? About the promises she made, the understanding we had? Or did she conveniently forget to mention that she fled Baltimore to escape breach of promise charges?" Nathan had dealt with enough liars to recognize the particular blend of truth and fabrication in Chester's words. Eleanor had mentioned courtship, rejection, threats, but not promises made on her part. He trusted the woman who'd crawled through hell over the dandy who'd ridden up looking for trouble. "She told me plenty. About a man who courted her, then abandoned her for a better prospect. About threats made when she chose to move on with her life. Funny how your version differs from hers." Chester's expression hardened. "My version is the truth. Eleanor Hayes promised to marry me, accepted gifts, compromised her reputation in my company, then ran west the moment my family arranged a more suitable match. That's theft and breach of promise, Mr. Cole. Actionable offenses." "That's so. Then where's your sheriff? Your warrant? Your legal authority?" Nathan's voice stayed level despite the anger building in his chest. "Because near as I can tell, you're just a jilted man chasing a woman who had the good sense to see through your bullshit." The hired muscle shifted, his hand moving toward his gun, but Chester waved him back. "I don't need legal authority to reclaim what's mine. Eleanor will come with me willingly once she understands the alternative." "And what alternative would that be?" "Scandal, ruin. I can destroy your reputation in this territory, Mr. Cole. Spread stories about your desperate marriage to a woman of loose morals, about how she tricked you into taking damaged goods. By the time I'm done, no one will do business with you. You'll be a laughingstock." Nathan smiled, and it wasn't a friendly expression. "See, that's where you've miscalculated. You think I care what strangers think of me? You think reputation matters more than the woman in that house who fought harder to get here than you fought for anything in your entitled life. Everyone cares about reputation. It's the only currency that matters. Then you really don't understand Wyoming, or Eleanor, or what matters to people who've learned to value substance over surface." Nathan picked up his rifle, not aiming it, just holding it with comfortable familiarity. "Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to mount your expensive horse, take your hired gun, and ride back to whatever hotel you're staying at in Clearwater. Tomorrow morning, you're going to catch the eastbound stage, and you're never going to contact Eleanor again." Chester's face flushed with anger. "You can't." "I can. This is my land. I'm within my rights to remove trespassers by whatever means necessary. And Chester? Nathan's voice dropped to something cold and hard. I found my wife half dead in a canyon and brought her back through sheer stubborn will. You think I won't protect her from a coward who threatens scandal instead of facing honest rejection? I could have you arrested for threatening me. You could try, but Sheriff Morrison knows me, knows Eleanor, knows the whole story of how she arrived and what she survived. Who do you think he'll believe? Established ranchers who've earned respect through hardship, or some eastern dandy throwing around wild accusations? The hired muscle spoke for the first time, his voice gravelly. Mr. Whitmore, maybe we should— Shut up. Chester's composure had cracked, revealing the petty cruelty beneath. Eleanor, I know you're in there. Come out and face what you've done. The house door opened. Eleanor stood framed in the doorway, no crutches, no visible weakness, her bearing straight and proud despite the limp that marked her steps as she crossed the yard. She moved like a woman walking toward a firing squad, afraid but refusing to show it, determined to face her past on her own terms. Chester, her voice was steady. You shouldn't have come. Shouldn't have, he sputtered, genuine shock crossing his features. Eleanor, look at you, crippled, living in squalor, married to a dirt farmer who can barely provide basic comfort. Is this really preferable to the life I offered you? Eleanor stopped beside Nathan, and he felt her hand find his, their fingers lacing together with practiced ease. The life you offered was a cage. Beautiful, comfortable, suffocating. This— she gestured at the ranch around them, at the simple house and the hard land and the future they were building. This is freedom. This is choice. This is a partner who values my mind as much as my capability, who doesn't flinch when I'm difficult or damaged, or difficult because I'm damaged. You're delusional. You've convinced yourself this poverty is preferable to being your ornament, your acceptable wife after the better prospect fell through? Yes, Chester. I prefer this. I prefer a man who searched for me when I was dying over one who threatened me when I was leaving. I prefer partnership over ownership. I prefer Wyoming's honesty over Baltimore's polite cruelty. Chester's expression twisted with rage, and something that might have been genuine pain if he'd been capable of feeling anything beyond wounded pride. You'll regret this. When winter comes and you're freezing in that hovel, when your crippled legs fail completely, when he realizes what a burden you are, you'll regret choosing this over me. I already lived through winter, Eleanor said quietly, already faced my legs failing, already discovered what it means to be chosen when you're at your worst instead of your best. And Chester, I've never regretted it once. Not when I was fevered and dying, not when I couldn't walk, not when isolation and hardship tested everything I thought I knew about myself. Because this life, hard as it is mine, really mine, not performed for someone else's approval. Nathan felt pride surge through him at the strength in Eleanor's voice, the absolute certainty with which she claimed her choice. This wasn't the desperate woman who'd written those first careful letters. This was someone who'd been broken and rebuilt herself into something stronger than she'd been before. Chester seemed to shrink before their combined certainty, his power revealed as the illusion it had always been. You're making a mistake. No, Eleanor said. I made a mistake when I let you court me, when I believed your pretty promises, when I thought love meant reshaping myself into whatever you wanted. Coming here, choosing Nathan, building this life, that's the first real decision I ever made. And I'd make it again. The hired muscle cleared his throat. Mr. Whitmore, we should go. These folks have made their position clear. For a moment, Nathan thought Chester might escalate, might try something stupid born of wounded ego, but the man's survival instincts apparently exceeded his pride. He remounted his horse with jerky movements, his face mottled with anger and humiliation. This isn't over, he said, but the words rang hollow. Yes, Eleanor replied. It is. Goodbye, Chester. I hope you find someone who actually wants the life you're offering, but that person was never me. They watched Chester and his hired gun ride back down the valley road until they disappeared around the bend. Only then did Eleanor's composure crack. her body sagging against Nathan's as the adrenaline drained away. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "Afraid he'd convince you. Afraid he'd destroy what we'd built. Afraid—" "Shh." Nathan turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "Eleanor, look at me. Did you honestly think I'd choose his version of you over the reality I've lived with for 6 months? Did you think pretty words from a stranger would outweigh everything we've survived together? I didn't know what to think. He's so persuasive, so certain of his own narrative. He's a small man pretending to be large, the kind who only feels powerful when making others feel small. You outgrew him, Eleanor. Probably outgrew him long before you ever left Baltimore. Coming here just made it obvious." Lila appeared from behind the cottonwood, her book forgotten, her face anxious. "Mama, are you all right?" Eleanor pulled herself together with visible effort, opening her arms for the child who rushed into them. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just dealing with a piece of my past that needed putting to rest. Was that man being mean to you? Because Papa says we don't tolerate meanness on this ranch." "No, we don't. But he's gone now. Gone for good." That night, after Lila was asleep and the house had settled into its familiar quiet, Nathan found Eleanor at the kitchen table with pen and paper, her expression thoughtful. "Writing?" he asked. "To Mrs. Henderson, and to a lawyer in Cheyenne that Morrison recommended. I want documentation of Chester's threats, of his arrival here, of everything he said, just in case he tries to cause trouble later." "Sensible, though I doubt he'll be back. Men like that don't persist once they've been publicly rejected. Men like that can be unpredictable when their pride is wounded. I'd rather have protection in place we never need than be caught unprepared." Eleanor set down her pen and looked at him fully. "Thank you for standing with me, for not doubting even when he was laying out accusations designed to create doubt." "Nothing to thank me for. That's what partnership means. Standing together when standing is hard." "Is it, though? What partnership means to you?" Eleanor's voice held genuine curiosity. "Because I keep waiting for the moment when you get tired of difficult. When you decide I'm more trouble than I'm worth. When the reality of being married to a crippled woman with complicated history becomes too much." Nathan pulled out the chair beside her, sitting so they were eye level. "You want to know what partnership means to me? It means finding someone who argues with me about fence lines because she cares about doing things right. It means watching you fight for every inch of independence even when fighting hurts. It means seeing you face down the man who tried to cage you and choosing freedom anyway. That's not trouble, Eleanor. That's treasure. Treasure that comes with a permanent limp and a scandalous past. Treasure that comes with the kind of strength most people never develop because they're never tested hard enough to discover it." He caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I found you in a canyon after you'd crawled for 4 days to keep a promise. Everything since then has just confirmed what I learned in that moment. You're worth fighting for, worth standing with, worth choosing every single day." Eleanor's eyes filled with the tears she finally let fall, her free hand coming up to cup his face. "I love you, not because you saved me or gave me freedom or any of the other reasons that might make sense, but because you see me, really see me, and love what you find, even the difficult parts, especially the difficult parts. The difficult parts are what make you interesting. Easy is boring, Eleanor. You're anything but boring." She laughed through her tears, and the sound held more joy than sadness. "We're a strange pair, you know that? A widowed rancher and a mail-order bride who arrived broken and stayed anyway. Strange is good. Strange means we built something unique instead of copying someone else's blueprint." Nathan pulled her close, feeling her melt against him with the trust that still surprised him. "And for what it's worth, I'm glad you stayed. Glad you chose this life over safety. Glad you're exactly as stubborn and difficult and magnificent as you are." They sat together in the quiet kitchen, holding each other as the night deepened around them. Outside, the valley breathed with the sounds of spring, the creek's endless conversation with stone, the wind moving through new grass, the distant cry of a coyote calling its mate. The world turned on its axis, indifferent to human struggle and triumph. But in this small house, two people who'd found each other through impossible circumstances held tight to what they'd built. Not perfect, not easy, but real and chosen, and theirs. Summer arrived in full, the ranch demanding long days of hard work. Eleanor's strength continued to improve, her limp growing less pronounced, though it would never fully disappear. She learned to ride well enough to help with light stock work, to walk distances that would have been impossible 6 months earlier, to reclaim pieces of herself that the crash had taken. Lila thrived under Eleanor's teaching, her reading advancing beyond her years, her natural curiosity finding outlet in the lessons Eleanor designed. The child had stopped asking when her real mother was coming back, stopped comparing Eleanor to Sarah. At some point between winter and spring, Eleanor had simply become Mama, and the family she'd joined had become entirely, completely hers. In July, Morrison made his final visit, examining Eleanor's legs with professional thoroughness before declaring her healed as much as she would ever be. "You've made remarkable progress," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "Most people with injuries like yours never walk again. You've proven me wrong, Eleanor Cole." "Good," Eleanor replied. "I've been proving people wrong my whole life. Nice to add you to the list." Morrison laughed and packed his bag, refusing payment for services he claimed were offset by the satisfaction of witnessing her recovery. After he left, Eleanor stood on the porch, looking out at the valley, Nathan beside her, Lila playing with the barn cat in the yard. "I made it," Eleanor said quietly. "From that canyon to here, from broken to whole enough, from alone to—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Home," Nathan supplied. "You made it home." "Home," Eleanor agreed, testing the word. "Yes, that's exactly what this is." She'd traveled over 1,000 miles to answer an advertisement, survived a crash that should have killed her, crawled through desert heat with broken legs because she'd given her word, fought fever and infection and every reason to give up, faced winter isolation, learned to walk again, confronted the past that tried to reclaim her. And through it all, she discovered something more valuable than safety or comfort or any of the things Baltimore had offered. She discovered what it meant to be chosen for herself rather than her usefulness, to be valued for her strength rather than her compliance, to be loved not despite her difficulties but because of the courage it took to keep fighting through them. The promise that had never arrived on schedule had become something better than punctuality. It had become partnership built on honesty and tested by hardship. It had become a family forged by choice rather than obligation. It had become a life worth every impossible mile of the journey. Nathan's arm came around her waist, solid and steady. "What are you thinking?" "That I used to measure my life in obligations fulfilled and expectations met. But standing here, I realize I've stopped counting, stopped measuring, stopped trying to prove I'm enough." "Because you finally believe it?" "Because I finally found people who never doubted it, who saw me at my absolute worst and chose me anyway." Eleanor leaned into her husband's strength, watching their daughter chase the cat through grass turned gold by afternoon sun. "I was so focused on arriving on time that I missed the point entirely. It was never about punctuality. It was about being willing to crawl through hell to keep a promise, about finding someone who'd search beyond hope to honor his. We're both stubborn that way. Thank goodness for that." They stood together in the doorway of their home, surveying the land they would work and the life they would build. Not perfect, not easy, but theirs, chosen deliberately, brick by impossible brick. The woman who'd crawled through hell had learned to walk again, to love again, to trust that she was treasured rather than merely useful. The man who'd searched beyond hope had learned to open his heart again, to build partnership instead of depending on solitary strength. And the child who'd lost one mother had gained another through the particular alchemy of choice and commitment that made family real. This was the life they'd built from wreckage and determination, the love they'd forged from hardship and honesty. The family they'd chosen when choosing was difficult and staying was harder. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything that mattered.